Welcome to an all-new episode of Get Lit with Lianna, the podcast. Join me as I sit down with a new guest author in each episode to discuss their books, careers, and everything in between. Today I'm sitting down with romance author Amanda Elliot, who wrote the new romcom Best Served Hot. I had the best time chatting with Amanda today about how she transitioned from writing YA and middle grade books to writing adult books. Of course, her love for all different types of cuisine, especially New York restaurants. I got so many good recommendations of places to eat. I'm so excited. We talked about why it's important to have Jewish main characters in romance books. And of course, some of my favorite moments from this book. Without further ado, my conversation with Amanda Elliot starts right now. Welcome, Amanda, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Obviously, I've been a fan of your writing for quite some time now, and I really loved your new book, Best Served Hot. So I'm really excited to have you here and to get to chat with you today. Firstly, how are you? What's new? Are you excited that this book is coming out? Tell me all the things.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm excited to be here too. So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this book. It's kind of, I live in New York City. I love restaurants and food. And so this book is kind of my love letter to New York City and its food scene, basically. Like in the same way, my first book, Sadie on a Plate, was my love letter to Jewish food.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for people to get to read this book and, learn about the food that I love so much.
I'm so excited. We're obviously going to talk about your love for food and how that's such a through line of your books. But before we get into this book specifically, I would love to first chat a bit about your writing background and how all this came to you. Because I know you first were really working in the YA space and then after transitioned into the adult space. So I'd love to first hear about maybe how you became an author, when you started writing, if you've always been writing, just some of that background.
Absolutely. Yeah. So these books are published as Amanda Elliot, which is my kind of adult romance pen name. But my debut came out in 2015 under Amanda Panich. And I've had several more young adult and middle grade books published under that name since then. I've pretty much been a writer since I can remember. Even just before I can remember, really, because my dad has a collection of little hand illustrated, handwritten picture books about animals on a farm that he has in his cabinet that I don't remember writing. But yeah, I think that I've always loved reading and writing and the library. And I just, when I sold my debut, it was kind of like dreams coming true. And it's still, kind of my dreams coming true to still be here publishing almost 10 years later.
Right. So when you decided to make a go of it and start doing this professionally and trying to get your books published, why did you decide to start with the YA middle grade, that age kind of books?
I think that I started with YA because I was pretty close to a young adult in age myself. When I wrote my debut, I want to say 23. I think I was 24 when it published. Or no, it was 26. I was 24 when it sold, 26 when it published, I think. Don't quote me on that. Okay. Math is not my, I'm a writer. Math is not my strongest suit. But I still, felt very close to that teen headspace. I was in that kind of in between transition where I had just gotten kind of my first real adult job and had first really moved out for the first time. And so I think it just naturally came to me back then. Up to then, the only thing I'd really written was YA. And I still love YA. I still write YA. I still read a lot of YA. I still love, YA and all the YA books coming out now, which are, if anything, even more diverse and exciting and fun than when, I was first reading and writing in the space.
For sure.
But yeah, and as I got older, I kind of aged into hopefully a more adult now. I'm 33 now. And so the adult voice kind of comes naturally to me now.
Mm-hmm. So what was that transition kind of leaping from the YA writing to the adult writing? At what point were you okay, this is something I want to try. This is something different.
So Sadie on a Plate was actually the first adult book I had written. And it kind of came as a surprise. I'd been working on other middle grade and YA stuff, and Sadie just kind of started out as something fun because I always kind of like to have something going on the side that isn't necessarily with the publishing world in mind, because, as a professional author, I'm not only writing with my own interests and my own taste in mind. I'm also always thinking will this sell? will this like do
Hmm.
well in the market? Like, is this in a dead genre? Like, will my agent like this? Things like that. And so Sadie, I actually started just as kind of a fun project, like it's something to do on the side. Like I just wanted to write about food. I wanted to write about Top Chef, all things that I
Hmm.
love. And it just started out as something fun. And then I started getting into it and I was like, huh, maybe this actually could sell. And then I started thinking about it with more of that in mind. But yeah, that's how that started.
Crazy. And then was it hard, like, to transition from a YA publisher to an adult publisher? Like, what was that like in terms of getting the book actually published, sold out there?
It didn't seem that different for me. I'm sure it was different on my agent side because she was the one
Hmm.
kind of handling all the business stuff and the submission lists and everything. But really, the process didn't feel all that different from this side, except that I couldn't go back to any of my previous editors because they were editing YA. We were in a whole
Right.
new space of people who only did adult books.
Right. And then I guess at what point did you realize or did you come to the decision where you were like, I think I have to change my pen name if I'm writing adult books? Like, what was that decision?
So it was actually a pretty harmonious decision between myself and my publisher,
Okay.
because my YA books are very, are kind of dark thrillers versus my adult books were more like kind of fun, light rom-coms. And so my publisher actually reached out to me first, like, would you want to use like a pen name just to separate yourself from these books since they're so different in genre and like a reader who, picks up your YA books will not won't be getting the same thing when they pick up these books. And I
Hmm.
had actually been thinking about the same thing myself.
Hmm.
So I was happy to do it. And I
Right.
like having, kind of a separation between the two identities, although it does get confusing. I always have to really remind myself, like when I'm signing books, like, okay, this book, sign Amanda Elliot, this book, sign Amanda Panich.
Right. So crazy. And I guess now that you are doing both, are you doing both at the same time? Do you have YA books still coming out? Or are you kind of all adult now?
I hope to continue to do, multiple age groups still going into the
Okay.
future.
That's so fun. So now when you're like thinking of a book concept, I guess it kind of the concept will determine what type of book it is. But do you ever have like a storyline that you feel like, oh, it kind of could go either way, and then you have to make the decision like what kind of voice you want to use to tell that story, or it's kind of distinct for you?
Totally. I mean, so far it's been pretty straightforward, I think. Like I haven't
Mhm.
really wrestled with it too much, but there have definitely been times where I'm like, I'll be working on a project and it won't necessarily be working and I'll be like, but would this work in YA? Like if I change the
Mhm.
characters' jobs and like, maybe kind of change what they were working toward, but like this overall concept might still work. And like really thought about that. But it hasn't really been a major issue so far.
Okay. Well, it's still fun that you have the possibility and you have the ability to like you have so many options. You're able to do both, which is really cool. And I feel like not a lot of authors have that ability. So that's really, really fun and must be like really fulfilling for you creatively to know that like literally you are limitless. You are boundless in what you could write and what you could do.
It's a lot of fun, and I like knowing that like there are because it's almost like taking a break. Like so if I'm getting sick of writing like an adult book in that voice, I can kind of switch over to a YA book or a middle grade book, and
Yeah.
have it's like a different kind of mindset to be working on that.
100%. So your adult books are obviously very food centric, which I'm obsessed with. Obviously, Sadie is a total love letter to Jewish food and being a Jewish person. I was just obsessed with that and ate it up, no pun intended.
Thank you.
And then Best Served Hot obviously still revolves in the food world. You just mentioned before that you're like a big foodie living in New York. I'm obsessed with going to New York. When I go to New York, I just plan my restaurants. Like it's just a food tour while I'm there. What like inspired you, I guess, to write these books aside from your love of food? Like when you decided you were going to write adult books, where you're like 100% these need to be all about food. Like what was that connection?
I just think it's hard for me to write a book at this point that doesn't include food.
Okay.
Because I think even if you're reading like my middle grade books, like they're not explicitly about food, but there are still like scenes kind of throughout, like where the main character and her mother are cooking together, and that's like kind of like a bonding scene for them, or like
Mhm.
they'll be throwing food at each other, and that's like a way to kind of show conflict. So I think there's just always food in everything that I write because I think about food nonstop.
Yeah.
So yeah, it came pretty naturally to write these books and have them focus so heavily on food because like food is just a really strong interest of mine. Like I read cookbooks for fun.
Uh,
I collected them actually during the pandemic,
no
and it
way.
actually got really bad because I live in a small New York City apartment. They
Yeah.
were taking over the apartment, and so finally I was like, okay, like I need to like I want to keep reading these cookbooks, but I'm going to get them from the library before like and then read through them and try some recipes. And if I really like them, then like I'll
Then
buy
you'll
it.
buy
So
it.
that's kept it mostly in check.
That's so fun. So are you a huge bake cook? Like, are you always in the kitchen, like in your real life when you're not writing? Is that something you love to do?
I do. It's my favorite kind of like, my non-writing, non-reading
Yeah.
hobby. Like I love, trying new restaurants. And of course the fun of being in New York is that, there's always new cuisines and new restaurants to
Yes.
try. And I love cooking. I was one of those people over the pandemic who got into like bread baking.
I love it.
So I made my first like babkas and challahs. So it was a lot
Mm,
of fun. The
yeah.
challahs, babkas, like it took a little while to get right. Like for a while
Yeah.
they were turning out kind of like underbaked in the middle and too crispy on the outside. I think because of like the twisting. Like I don't know if I was doing it right, but but eventually I got it right.
Yeah.
And the challahs just like were gorgeous from the start. I used Smitten
Yeah.
Kitchen's like perfect challah recipe, and
Okay.
like they're just gorgeous and they smell amazing and they
Best.
taste amazing. So yeah, big fan.
Oh my God, same. In peak pandemic, I was also the exact same boat. My cousin made sourdough starter and brought me some of her. So then I was on a
Ooh.
sourdough kick. But to me too, like every Shabbat, I was making challah. And there was one point in the pandemic where yeast was impossible to find because everyone was baking bread. And I just remember being like, I can't make a challah without yeast, and like trying to order yeast on Amazon and all this stuff. And it's just challah, like nothing that's unrivaled. It's the best food ever. But in New York, like
Absolutely.
what are your like go-to low-key places? Because I'm going to New York in a month and I need more. I have to start making reservations now. New York books up real quick, 30 days in advance.
Oh my God. So I have so many, like, I think my favorite neighborhood probably for food is Jackson Heights, and
Okay.
Elmhurst in Queens. And so one of my favorite things to do, like actually my birthday plans this year, me and my friends are like taking our husbands and we're just going to spend the day out there hopping from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant.
So
And
fun.
so there are like, it's like hard to find a bad choice out there.
Okay.
Like, but some of my favorites, I love Hug Isan,
Okay.
Hugesan, which I believe is like mostly northern Thai food. And so there's a ton of like, everything I've tried there has been good, but my absolute favorite thing is they have this fried tilapia salad, which
Ooh.
again, like not usually a huge fish person, not usually a
Yeah.
huge tilapia person, but it is like hands down one of the best things I've ever eaten.
Wow.
They take a whole tilapia and they chop it up and they fry like all the pieces in like kind of a very crispy, like light rice batter. And then they pour over, I don't know what exactly is in the dressing, but it's definitely like lime juice and fish sauce and
Ooh,
like sugar.
okay.
And it's like, it's amazing. It's like, wakes up your whole mouth. And like somehow, like there's some kind of magic where they pour it all over and like drench all the pieces of fish, but somehow the fish stays like crispy, but it still soaks up
Oh,
all the dressing. And then they just scatter over like red onion and all these fresh herbs and stuff on top of that. And it's just like one of the best things I've ever eaten.
oh my God.
I love the arepa lady. Like I know
Okay.
that it's pretty basic, but like her arepas I think are amazing. Um, there's like I forget what it's called, but it's a Momo spot. It's part of the
Okay.
Momo crawl, and they
Okay.
have like amazing, momos, which are like the Nepalese dumplings, and they're doughy and delicious,
Oh,
and yeah, really like it's hard to
you
find
can't go
something bad
wrong.
there.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can't go wrong. New York is just like the best food city ever. And every time I go, I'm like, I need to try everything new, but then I find something that I love. And I only go like 3, 4 times a year. So it's like, how do I not go back to the places that I'm obsessed with when there's still so much to try? Like
exactly.
it's such a
Even living
problem.
there, like I wrestle with that too because I'm like, well, I could try this new place that's getting all this buzz, but like also like, I could go back to this place that I know I already love, and
Exactly.
it's so hard. And then sometimes the best thing is when you like, because of course like I'm always reading like the food blogs and the, all the stuff
Hmm.
like that. But the best is when you just kind of stumble in somewhere and it's amazing.
Like a
Like,
hole in the wall random, and you're just like
yeah.
a hidden gem. Yeah.
No, there's this one place where my friend and I were going in the theater district because we were seeing a Broadway show,
Hmm.
and we were going to go to this one place, but then we were walking by another place and we saw like the menu and it had like all these pictures of noodles on it, and we were like, oh my goodness, let's go have these noodles. And it was I think it was Uyghur cuisine, which I'd never really had before, like
Okay.
from what northwestern China, and it was amazing. It was so good. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I can look it up after and send it to
Please
you
tell
for like the
me.
show notes or something. But
Oh,
it was just like amazing, and it was just like
oh,
we had these giant bowls of like noodles with vegetables, and it was like nothing I'd ever really
wow.
had before, and it was just like I felt like it really made like a find.
Oh my God. My boyfriend lived in New York for a year last year because he was producing a Broadway show. So when I would go down to visit him, I'd be like screaming that we need to go all these places. And I just said to him like all the time, like, I don't know how you're here and you're not eating at restaurants
I know.
3+ times a day. Like I would have living in New York, if I was in New York or full time living in the city, like I think I would have just consistent FOMO of all of the restaurants I could be eating at. But then, like, obviously, you can't eat at restaurants every single day, every single meal. But how do you not? Like, oh God, I'm jealous that you live there and you could just like take the subway up and go wherever you want to go. That's the dream. But now that we're talking about food, I feel like this is like the perfect transition to talk about Best Served Hot. So before we talk about some of my favorite moments and things about it, I would love to like have a little synopsis, if you can, of what this book's about.
Absolutely. So, like I said before, Best Served Hot is my love letter to New York City food scene. It's about two restaurant critics, Julie and Bennett. They have very different tastes and methods of reviewing food, although they're both kind of professional reviewers in their own way. And they're forced to work together after a video of them fighting at a food festival goes viral. And so the book follows their development of their relationship. There's some spice, there's some class warfare, and lots of food descriptions. And all of
Yes,
the restaurants in the book are based off real restaurants, which I talk about in the acknowledgments. So if
I
you're reading the
saw.
book and you're like, this meal sounds delicious, you can go to the acknowledgments and it talks about like where that meal was based on.
So, so, so much fun. I love that this book kind of is a commentary, I guess, on the power of social media versus like traditional publishing. And I love that you really like get into those differences in this book. Why was that one of the main themes you wanted to tackle within the story, aside from the whole food aspect?
So it was actually that kind of sparked the book to begin with because I've been following, I'm like to consider myself like very in tune with the food scene. Like I'm
Mhm.
following like all the, the reviews and that includes like the professional reviewers like, New York Times and the Washington Post and Eater and like, Grub Street and all these
Yeah.
places, but also like, the non-professional people who are doing it, just like the people who are talking about food on like Instagram or have like their
Hmm.
blogs or like, are doing this stuff kind of on the street. And it's really interesting to see the differences between the two. And to see like what kind of places they're covering, like who's doing the reviewing, because the people who are doing it professionally are still like mostly male, like
Yeah.
largely white,
Yeah.
largely like older, and they're focusing on food aimed towards a specific kind of like upper middle class like audience who is
Mhm.
reading their the New York Times and the Washington Post and all of these other places versus like the people on TikTok and Instagram and other places are, it's a lot of women, it's more people
Mhm.
of color, it's people focusing on places that might not necessarily like, merit the attention of a reviewer from the New York Times.
Mhm.
And so it's really fun. I thought it was really fun looking at the tension between the two of them, especially knowing that kind of like the traditional newspaper world is kind of losing subscribers while people are
Yeah.
getting their news and other things from social media now. And so I thought it was interesting to look at that. And of course, enemies to lovers is my favorite trope. I had to make them
Best
start
trope.
out as enemies.
Love.
And so, yeah, that's where the book came from. So I
So
really
much
love
fun.
looking at those differences.
Did you do a lot of research to like build these characters, like create Julie as an influencer? Like, did you have to do a lot of background research, or was it kind of like, I think I can get these people down? Like, I read enough food reviews, I follow enough food bloggers. Like, what was that process like?
Well, some of both. Like, because I follow, I've been fascinated for years, like reading kind of about the behind the scenes, like of New York Times reviewers and like how they wear disguises and like use
Yeah.
fake names and like go with different people and like all to keep people from recognizing them. So of course, like I refreshed myself and everything, but
Hmm.
I felt like I knew a lot about that and I'd watched a lot of like Instagram reviewers and stuff. But of course,
Yeah.
like I think a lot of like the numbers things, like I had to look up and be like, well, how much money would she be earning if she had this many followers? Because I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure she was earning like some money and had like, a good amount of followers, but she couldn't be like, a huge influencer, because otherwise, there wouldn't be this tension where she wanted to quit her job and she couldn't. So
Hmm.
that was probably the part of it that took the most research.
Okay, that makes sense. I love, obviously, in both of your books, all of the nods to Judaism, and especially in a world where anti-Semitism is unfortunately on the rise, which is so insane to think about. But I really
Yeah.
love getting to like read about Jewish people and their just regular lives and not really having Judaism be like such a focus of their life, but kind of just like a part of them. And I love, obviously, the relationship all of your main characters have with Jewish food. So what was that like, once again, getting to incorporate that into your story, having a Jewish main character and having touchstones of Jewishness and Jewish cuisine throughout?
Yeah, so I felt in the first book, in Sadie on a Plate, like her Jewishness was kind of a major part of the plot. Like she's not super observant, but like it's really like I said, it's like a love story. It's a love story to like my
Hmm.
Jewishness and my love for Jewish food and things like that. Versus in Best Served Hot, like really it's not a major part of the story. Like it is mentioned that she's Jewish, I think, at a couple points, but
Mhm.
it's not really, it doesn't form like a part of the narrative or her character, I think, the way that it did in Sadie on the Plate. But it was
Mhm.
important for me to make her Jewish because, I grew up reading Jewish books like that were all about the Holocaust, that were all about
Mhm.
like Jews being sad and like bad things happening to Jews. And I'm just like, it means a lot to me, like, even if it's not a major part of the story or the plot, like it means a lot to me to just like have a Jewish character being happy and like living her
Mhm.
life. And so it was important to me to do that.
Mhm. And I feel like that's what a lot of all different types of readers, but I know Jewish readers like myself who are very hungry to see characters that reflect us and just being regular people who are also Jewish. I know that there's a lot of value in that. And we're really, thank God, starting to see a real boom and rise of those types of stories. And there's just been more and more every year. So kudos to you for doing it, being one of the ones who are doing it. And obviously, we need to keep seeing more of it. But as a Jewish reader, seeing somebody that reflects you in some way on the page is really, really important. And I think Julie did just that in this book. So I just wanted to make mention of that because it's something really special and we're seeing more of, but not enough, you know?
Yeah, thank you. And I totally agree. Like, I got to shout out like Gene Meltzer and Meredith
Mhm.
Shore and Hannah Orenstein and all these
Mhm.
authors. Like, I'm sure I'm forgetting someone who I'm going to be like really kicking myself later, but all these authors who are just writing happy books about Jews falling in love and being happy. And
Yeah.
I love seeing it.
It's my favorite thing ever, ever, ever to write. But speaking about Jews falling in love, obviously we need to touch on the romance aspect of this book because, as you know, I know that we like our Instagram friends. You know that I'm obsessed with romance books, and that's what obviously drew me to this book. When writing the romance and playing with the tropes, like what was the most fun part about their relationship or playing with the tropes when you were like outlining the story?
Um, I had a lot of fun because, I love enemies to lovers and I
Hmm.
love kind of making that relationship start off like, yelling at each other and then they end up, kissing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun with all of it, but I think my favorite part of an enemies to lovers story is, that first inkling that like, oh, maybe they're not terrible. And so for
Hmm.
that in this book, it was their, so they have a few meetings where, they're yelling at each other at the food festival and that's a video that goes viral. Like they have
Hmm.
another like disastrous encounter that ends up with them both being kicked out of a restaurant. And then they both end up having to go back to the restaurant to review the food. And, their aim was to eat separately, but they of course end up like at the same table.
Hmm.
And they're still like antagonistic, but there's that kind of that first like conversation where you get a little glimpse into his soul and who he is. And Julie, she still is not single point of view, so we're not
Hmm.
given an insight into his head, but like Julie kind of first gets that first thought that like, oh, maybe he's not the absolute worst. Oh no, he is. He's definitely
Yeah.
still the absolute worst.
Yeah.
And so that's my, I think, is my favorite part of the whole journey.
It's so much fun, and that like push and pull tension is so, so good, and it's written so well on the page. Obviously, we need to talk about the steam in this book because it does get a little spicy. What's that like for you to write? Is it like an awkward thing, a fun thing? Like, tell me about writing steam. I always love asking authors
uh
this.
It's some of both actually. So, Sadie on a Plate was closed door. So this is my
Hmm.
first on page, like, explicit sex scene. And
Hmm.
it was both fun to write, but it's also like reading it over again is very awkward because I just can't get out of my head, like, my mom's gonna read this. My
Right.
dad's gonna read this. Like people I know in real life are gonna read this. So like I love the thought of like people I don't know in real life reading it, but like as
Yeah.
far as like, anyone who knows me in real life reading it, I would like them to get like a copy with specific printing error that just like takes out that whole scene.
Hmm.
So yeah, so definitely a
That's
little bit
funny.
of both.
Okay, that's fun. So now that this book is out there, what are you hoping people take away from it? Like, what are you hoping that audiences really, really gravitate to in the story or something that they like think about that maybe you didn't think they would think before?
Um, Honestly, I just hope they come away like happier than they were
Hmm.
when they started. I think that's what I go into writing like a rom com is like I want people to smile and like hopefully, my favorite thing is when people tell me like, I was having a bad day, but then I read part of your book and it made me like it made my like it put me in a good mood. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that makes me happy. So yeah,
Yeah.
like nothing super profound. Like, I mean, it would be great if they came away like learning stuff about like, a cuisine that they didn't really know much about, or
For
like just an
sure.
appreciation for like restaurant workers or something. But like really if they just finish it happier than when they started, like
I
that's a
love
win.
that. I love that. So now can I ask, like, what are you working on next? I'm sure you're doing a million things, and I know you have so much going on in your personal life too, but like, is there a book coming out again? Anything else?
Yeah, so I'm always writing and always working on something
I
new.
love
So
that.
nothing I can talk about publicly yet,
Okay.
but stay tuned. I
Okay.
have, if anyone wants to be like the first people to hear about it, I have a newsletter on my website, amandapanich.com. I promise I'm not annoying with the newsletter. I probably don't send it out as much as I should, but that's where I'll be, sharing news of the next book
Amazing. And
first.
obviously, I feel like it's safe to assume that it will be food related.
I don't think I can write anything that's not food related.
I knew it. I knew it. I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for taking the time. This was so much fun. I really love this book. I know everyone who reads it will enjoy it just as much as I did.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was really glad to get to talk to you.
Of course.